It's 7 o'clock. This is Sky News Breakfast. These are our top stories this morning. A moment of courage in Myanmar's deadly demonstrations. A nun filmed pleading to protect protesters says she was ready to die. Also ahead, NHS trusts accuse the government of snatching away a promised larger pay rise for staff as more unions join the row over the suggested 1% increase. Restore life-saving aid. Charities condemn government cuts in donations to Yemen as plans to slash aid to the world's worst-hit war zones are leaked in emails. An historic encounter. Pope Francis meets one of the most powerful figures in Shia Islam on the second day of the first papal visit to Iraq. And as the UK reckons with the cost of COVID, we hear from businesses which have been busier than ever during lockdown. England's cricketers struggled to save the fourth and final test against India after another top-order batting collapse.
And there was a lot of dry weather yesterday. Will it continue fine and settle this weekend? I'll have the details for you later in the programme.
And at 7:45, we'll take a look at the newspapers with the entrepreneur Kate Hardcastle and broadcaster, DJ and columnist Neve Spencer. A nun who knelt in front of armed security forces in Myanmar to stop them firing on civilians has said she was prepared to die to save protesters' lives. In what's been described as Myanmar's Tiananmen moment, Sister Nu Tong was filmed pleading with police and soldiers, begging them not to fire on demonstrators. Meanwhile, protesters returned to the streets of Mandalay overnight, but demonstrations were curtailed when they heard security forces were approaching. The city has been the scene of several deaths as security forces try to crush opposition to the February the 1st coup that overthrew the elected government. The UN Special Envoy has called for urgent Security Council action, saying around 50 peaceful protesters have been killed in military crackdowns this week. Our Southeast Asia correspondent Siobhan Robbins reports now on one sister's extraordinary bravery.
In Myitkyina, armed police are in pursuit. People are running for their lives. They fear a beating or worse. But during this battle, a moment of breathtaking courage. Someone is kneeling in the road. Sister Anne Rosa Nu Tong has stepped between police and protesters. A nun desperately pleading with officers not to shoot. The danger is real. Junta forces killed 18 people in Myanmar on Sunday. Look, there's a sister over there stopping them, a shocked reporter says. And being a 45-year-old nun doesn't guarantee protection. After the protests, Sister Anne Rosa tended to the injured. Among them a journalist cornered and beaten.
ကာကွယ်ပေးမဲ့လူကျမတို့ဘယ်သူကာကွယ်ရမလဲဆိုကိုပြည်သူအချင်းချင်းပဲကာကွယ်ရတော့မယ်အခုကတော့လေနော်ဘယ်သူမှယုံကြည်လို့မရတော့ဘူးလုံခြုံမှုလည်းမရှိတော့ဘူးသူတို့နည်းနည်းဟိုဖြစ်တဲ့လူဆိုရင်အကုန်ဖမ်းတာပဲရိုက်တာပဲနော်လိုက်ဆွဲတာပဲ
And as the UN talks about how to help, Myanmar's finding its own heroes, those ready to step up for its people. An ordinary person doing the extraordinary against a terrifying military threat. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Bangkok.
Also this morning, NHS Providers, which represents NHS trusts in England, has challenged the government over its 1% pay rise offer for staff, claiming a larger figure was promised in previous spending plans. The government is under pressure over the controversial rise, with a number of unions writing to the Chancellor to express their anger overnight. Let's bring in our political correspondent now, Rob Powell. So, Rob, what is the previous rise that has been offered that they're suggesting?
So it was an assumption that was basically published in this document that was released about a year after the long-term plan, the NHS long-term plan was announced by Theresa May back in 2018. And there's a table basically within this document, which is an implementation framework, that's what it says that it is, that essentially says that a 2.1% pay rise, you can see there, would be assumed for the 2021-22 financial year. Now, that has led NHS Providers, which basically represents NHS trusts, so NHS trusts are frontline care settings like hospitals. They have said, their Deputy Chief Executive, Saffron Caudry, has said that this document will mean that some will think the government is snatching planned pay rises from the pockets of deserving NHS staff, so they don't have to fund the extra costs of COVID-19, which the Chancellor personally committed he would meet. Now, of course, the government has said that we're in a different world, really, since documents like this were published, that COVID-19 has put, yes, unprecedented stress on the NHS, but unprecedented stress on public finances as well. And that is why 1% is all the government can afford. I think the risk, though, is that pay rises and pay offers like this and what they do in terms of the morale in the workforce could dent the desire of people to apply for jobs in the NHS in nursing at a time when pressures on the NHS are going to continue, when they deal with backlogs from the COVID pandemic. Also, strike action, whilst the NHS is attempting to recover and deal with those backlogs, would not be good for the government either. I think there will be plenty of people in Westminster, probably privately at the moment, wondering why the government, given it had been in a good political position with the vaccine rollout and with the budget landing well, wondering why the government has chosen to pick a fight like this.
Rob, thank you. All businesses in England will now be able to sign up for free COVID rapid test kits as part of the government's testing programme. Companies, including those with fewer than 50 employees, can register for lateral flow kits for their workers until the end of June. The test return results in under 30 minutes. The Health Secretary says the move is crucial in helping businesses protect their workplaces and employees. The latest COVID figures show that a further 5,947 people have tested positive for the virus. 236 have died within 28 days of testing positive, and that brings the total number of deaths to 124,261. 21.35 million first doses of a vaccine have now been administered. To Iraq now, where Pope Francis has been meeting one of the most influential figures in Shia Islam on the second day of the first papal visit to the country. In the last few minutes, Pope Francis has left the home of the Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani after spending around an hour with him in Iraq's holy city of Najaf. Well, our Middle East correspondent Mark Stone joins me now from Mosul. And Mark, just reflecting on how significant this visit actually is.
It's extraordinary. It really is. I think there was a genuine expectation that the security situation in Iraq and the dual threat of the coronavirus too would mean that the Pope would need to postpone the visit. But it's gone ahead, and clearly there's there's a controversy about that, but he was determined that it would. The core of this Pope's outlook is interfaith dialogue, and that is why he has for so long wanted to come to the Middle East and to Iraq, where religious polarization seems to be pulling the country and indeed the region apart. I should explain that, first of all, where we are now. We're in Mosul, Iraq's second city, up in northern Iraq. Until 4 years ago, this was the capital of the so-called Islamic State, the Caliphate. In fact, it was in this mosque that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of the Islamic State, declared his caliphate back in 2014. He stepped up to the pulpit of the then intact mosque and said that from here to Rome, the Islamic State would rule. Well, Rome has now come, as people are saying here, to Baghdad and to Iraq in the form of the Pope. The mosque is now destroyed. It is being rebuilt slowly, as indeed is the city. The city around us is utterly destroyed. It's empty as well this morning because of a curfew, because of the coronavirus. The Pope will be here in this city tomorrow as the final day of his tour. But as you say, he is at the moment down in Najaf. He has just had the most extraordinary and deeply, deeply symbolic meeting with Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, the most senior Shia cleric in the Muslim world, and a very, very influential figure right across the Muslim world, which explains why the Pope was so keen that these two men should be seen meeting together. They talked together, they prayed together for around about an hour. This in history will be seen as a very, very important moment. 2 years ago he was in Cairo, where he met Sunni leaders. Now he is doing the same with Shia leaders. This afternoon he will head to Ur, the famous archaeological site, the birthplace, so it's thought, of Abraham, the patriarch of the three monotheistic religions, Islam, Christianity and Judaism, again bringing together this interfaith dialogue. And then tomorrow he will come up here, which I think will be the most human aspect of his trip, the most poignant part of his visit, where he will meet those people who lived under the Islamic State. Remember, 1/3 of Iraq was controlled by the Islamic State until just 4 years ago. And the barbarism that people endured here was horrific. We were speaking to a family yesterday who broke down in tears as they recalled their time under the Islamic State. You can hear their story later on Sky News. He will meet people like that family and he will pray with them as he calls for an end to extremism and bringing together of different faiths, of interfaith dialogue.
For the moment, thank you. More on that throughout the course of the day. Time now for a look at the morning's other main stories. And a sergeant in the Welsh Guards has died after being injured in a live firing exercise in southwest Wales. It follows an incident at the Castle Martin training area in Pembrokeshire. It's believed the sergeant had served in Iraq and Afghanistan and was training ahead of a planned deployment to Iraq in the summer. Downing Street has spent more than £2.6 million on renovations in order to hold televised news briefings. The makeover includes structural changes, equipment and internet infrastructure so that 9 Downing Street can host daily news conferences. It comes as Number 10 denied Conservative Party funding had been used to pay for refurbishments to the Prime Minister's flat above 11 Downing Street. NASA's Mars rover has taken a short test drive 2 weeks after touching down on the Red Planet. Pictures from Perseverance show tracks of where it has travelled within the Jezero crater, where it's searching for signs of past life. The short journey lasted just over half an hour. A leaked document suggests the government should cut aid spending to some of the world's most conflict-ridden countries by up to 2/3. It comes as more than 100 charities condemn the UK's plan to reduce aid to Yemen, a move which drew cross-party criticism this week. The chief executive of Oxfam and one of the signatories of the letter to the Prime Minister is Danish Riskandarajah, who joins me now. Good morning to you. Before we go into this letter and what it's calling for, can you describe what the situation in Yemen is like at the moment?
Thirds of the population are in need of humanitarian assistance. We've had more than 5 years of brutal armed...
Sorry, I wonder if I can just ask you to start that answer again. We lost your sound briefly, momentarily. So just really to explain the situation in Yemen.
Sure. Thanks, Gillian. Look, Yemen is a country, as the United Nations says, is on the brink of famine, a famine of levels we haven't seen for decades. 2/3 of the population are in need of humanitarian assistance, and this entire country has been affected by a brutal armed conflict that has left people starving, homeless, displaced. It is arguably the world's worst humanitarian crisis that we're seeing today.
And you visited just over a year ago, I understand. What did you see on the ground?
It was a desperate situation, Gillian. I saw people who had been displaced, who'd been living in basically temporary camps for years in a country that already was suffering water shortages, was a country that was already unstable, has been really ripped apart by conflict. And, you know, what made me proud was the aid provided by Britain was saving lives. It was allowing us to provide water and food to
he was on the verge of taking his life before he was helped by their message crisis service. Now shout.
And Danny, I wonder if you can therefore explain just what the significance is of aid being cut to Yemen. What will it actually mean?
Look, almost certainly thousands, tens of thousands of lives are going to be lost as a result of this funding being reduced. The UK government has been, proudly leading the effort to provide humanitarian assistance in places like Yemen. 200-odd million pounds had been promised. That money is now going to be slashed by more than 60%. And it's a betrayal of not just the promises we made to the world's poorest and most needy, it's a betrayal of British values. It's an undermining of this government's stated aim to be global Britain, to provide this sort of positive leadership. And arguably, worst of all, it's a particularly callous decision because this government has actually increased the sales of British arms to Saudi Arabia, which is a party to the conflict, which we know is using some of those British arms to bomb indiscriminately in Yemen, affecting civilians and further driving people into desperation. And so this is almost the worst possible news we could have expected when it comes to the cuts to the aid budget.
What would you say to those who say simply that we can't afford to give the sums that previously we did, and particularly because of the pandemic, that there just aren't the resources available to help in the way that was previously promised?
So look, I recognise there's unprecedented need here in this country at the moment. But as the Archbishop of Canterbury said recently about these cuts, he said, it's important that we keep promises at the worst of times, not just at the best of times. And, there is a false economy between choosing not to fund humanitarian assistance in places like Yemen and cuts elsewhere. This money is not going to make a big difference to the United Kingdom's debt or fiscal budget situation, and it's desperately needed. And we also know that just as aid budgets are being cut, there's been increased expenditure. In fact, almost the same amount that's been cut out of the aid budget is being increased in the arms budget so that Britain can buy more bombs and bullets. And that just feels wrong. It's a betrayal of values that the British people have central to them.
So what exactly are you calling for in this letter to the Prime Minister?
We would ask for humanitarian assistance to be put at the heart of Britain's role in the world. We would like aid budgets to be back to what was legislatively promised a few years ago. What's remarkable about Britain is we were the first country to commit into legislation a 50-year-old promise that 0.7% of our GDP would be put to aid. That was an incredible commitment. It was a commitment on which almost every single member of the House of Commons stood as a manifesto pledge at the last election. And it would be a tragedy if this government, through executive fiat, reduces that collective will of the legislature without putting it to Parliament. You know, that's another implication here, that this is all being done from a government without going back to Parliament to seek approval on an important change.
Okay, we await that response from Parliament, from the Prime Minister on that letter. Danny Sriskandarajah, Chief Executive of Oxfam, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning. Now, a government spokesperson issued this response to the Open Democracy report, suggesting aid could be cut by as much as 2/3 to some of the world's most conflict-ridden countries. The seismic impact of the pandemic on the UK economy has forced us to take tough but necessary decisions, including temporarily reducing the overall amount we spend on aid. We're still working through what this means for individual programmes, and decisions have not yet been made. We remain a world-leading aid donor, and we will spend more than £10 billion this year to fight poverty, tackle climate change and improve global health. Time now for a look at the weather with Naz. And is it going to leave us feeling blue?
Why? Because we're wearing blue. I think it's more likely we're going to see bits of blue sky today rather than blue rain.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. Plenty of dry and bright weather out there once again for today. Now, that's all thanks to high pressure that's right over the UK and Ireland at the moment again. It is a chilly start out there this morning, though, especially where we've seen clearer skies overnight across some western and northeastern areas of Scotland in particular. The east of Scotland, temperatures are still below freezing, around -5 degrees Celsius in some spots there. So it's frosty, it's chilly, but it's mainly dry and bright, except across northwest Scotland. It's cloudier, less cold, some spells of rain there. Into this afternoon, we see little change on that story, really. We may see a build-up of cloud across some central, southern and eastern areas, and that may turn the sunshine hazy at times, under cloudier zones a bit cooler, but in the sunshine and light winds, it will feel mild.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Jackie's here with all the sport for us. What have you got coming up?
Oh, I've got a lot of wickets, not necessarily the ones you want to see. Anyway, England's cricketers looking in real trouble in the fourth and final test against India. Updates on the way as Joe Root's side lose early second innings wickets. Plus, there was a try of the season contender in the Pro 14 rugby last night as Munster tried to book their place in the final. And that is not a bird watcher, but in fact, golfer Jason Day will tell you why he had to reach for a pair of binoculars during his round in Florida.
Margaret was diagnosed with leukemia when she was, or in 2013. She was very, very young, and they were family friends of my family, so we followed the story very closely. And I was about 9 at the time, and this was when I was first exposed to the idea of the stem cell register. And so this is when people who have blood cancer and the cancer is too aggressive to cure with chemotherapy alone, or there are other blood disorders as well, such as thalassemia or sickle cell disease, where if it's a very serious illness and it's the only cure. So I found out about the stem cell register that way, and I found out about the need for more donors because only 2% of the UK population is on the stem cell register, and unfortunately that means that not all the people who join the stem cell register will be able to find their life-saving match, and that is absolutely devastating because it's the only cure, it's their only chance of survival. So that was what really inspired me to write the book, and obviously it was a long process from when I was 9 years old to then writing the book when I was 15. I think with young people, we are so enthusiastic about helping the world around us, and that's where the power of the story comes into this, because I wrote the book to engage with the teenage audience, because I knew that if you engaged with that audience in the right way, then they would absolutely be excited to join this register, because really the impact you have is incredible. You save somebody's life, and or you can save somebody's life if you're called. And I think not enough people recognize just how important that is to the person down the street, or somebody's best friend, or somebody's parent who's going to die if you don't register.
Jackie's here, starting with the cricket hotting up in more ways than one.
Oh, it's all gone wrong.
Oh.
Well, actually, if you're Indian, it's all gone right. If you're an England fan, it's all gone very, very wrong. Lots and lots of wickets, not the ones that England wanted. Let's have a quick look.
This sports bulletin is brought to you by Vitality, committed to getting 100 million people 20% more active by 2025.
Is this the future? With its rush of air, crunch of gravel and electric wine, Extreme E sounds and looks like nothing else, and is progressive enough and competitive enough to hook Jenson Button as a team owner. Button, who not so long ago seemed an electric skeptic.
If I'd said to you 5 years ago you'd be racing in an electric series, would you have laughed at me?
Look at it, it's so cool, it's so exciting. You know, this is an electric vehicle that has 550 horsepower. Initially we ran at 60% power. I was thinking, it's not very quick. And then we turned up to 100 and wow.
The series' 5 rounds will be held at global sites relevant to climate change, from oil-rich Saudi Arabia to a worryingly ever-greener Greenland. But to maximise the messaging on global warming, must the racing be red hot, and, like the eco-science content running in tandem, easy to follow.
The format's going to be really short races. You know, our attention span these days is not great. I mean, we're doing an interview here and neither of us are on our phones, which is unusual. We're going to be racing in places around the world that no one's really ever put a foot down on the sand or on the dirt. So for us, it's an amazing experience.
Extreme E enjoys relevance to the growing electric road car market, but unlike Formula E, a series Button declined to join, avoids unfavourable comparisons with F1. Perhaps as a result, it's attracted 3 F1 world champion owners, with Nico Rosberg and Button's fellow Briton Sir Lewis Hamilton also signed up.
Lewis Hamilton has a team, it's Button versus Hamilton again in a sense. He won't want his car to be beaten by Button's car.
Well, Sebastian Loeb is in Lewis Hamilton's car, so I think Lewis's team is pretty strong, and Nico Rosberg has a team as well. So it's F1 world champions reuniting.
In terms of its purpose, format and presentation, Extreme E is different. Will it create a buzz? Craig Slater, Sky Sports.
Starts now.
I'm in.
I'm in.
I'm in.
We're all in to kick it out.
Partnering to end racism in sport.
You were sitting up unconscious, I was snoring, I was out cold. That's a common thing getting knocked out in sparring. I retired at 28 because of sparring. I'm not the same man I used to because I've had it punched out of me. You can be a sparring partner for the day. You can be a sparring partner for an area champion, an English champion, a British champion. It gets a bit more interesting when you spar the big names, obviously. When I started becoming a sparring partner for You know, the Klitschko's, the Usic's, these superstars from other countries, all of a sudden you're being flown over, you're being picked up in fancy cars, you're being taken to either A, a nice hotel, or B, somewhere that resembles a prison in Ukraine. One or the other, and you're there for a week, you're there for 2 weeks, you're there for possibly 3 or 4. Tyson was good to me, he always goes my expenses a little bit extra. I sparred Klitschko and Usyk. Now these are two totally contrasting stories because I sparred Klitschko, flew to Munich and got picked up in the nicest car I've ever been in. So it was great. The fella even opened the car up, put me in and shut the door behind me. It was great. I thought, oh my God, I'm a superstar. Took me to about a 10-bed mansion up in the Alps. It was huge. Good train, 5-star facilities, and I got paid €1,500. I was only there for 4 days. It was unbelievable. It was just the most unbelievable time in my life. I only sparred 2 rounds and I ran away. I never got hit. I remember thinking, I hope they have me back next time. I don't think they are after this performance. You know, I'm impressed with me eating and that, but not the boxing. Contrast that with Alexander Usyk. Took me to the Olympic training base, and I've never been to prison, by the way, but this is what I imagine prison to be like. 200 years ago. I remember waking up at 4 AM, there was no duvet, no sheet, and it was about -10, it felt like. I was freezing, so didn't get back to sleep. Put about 3 jumpers on, 2 pairs of trousers, just sat in the bed thinking, why am I here? I was there for 2 weeks, and on the Thursdays I was there, we'd go to a spa where Usyk would stay, 5-star. Never seen anything better anywhere. Nowhere in the world have I been to a nicer place. When I'd leave and go back to the prison, not the prison, sorry, the where I was staying, it was just, I was so sad. If you're getting paid to spar, it ain't gonna be easy because they're not paying you for an holiday. Klitschko did, thank you. But
committed to getting 100 million people 20% more active by 2025.
It's 7:31, still to come on Sky News Breakfast, how women's careers have been damaged by the pandemic. Welcome back. Now, ahead of International Women's Day on Monday, new research has revealed 1 in 4 women have experienced a fall in income over the past year, and more than half say their career and their mental or physical well-being has been damaged by the pandemic. Investment Director at Fidelity International, Micah Curry, has joined us now from South London. Good morning to you. Tell us what your research has found by way of experiences of women in particular during the pandemic.
Well, what we found speaking to women is that a year of disruption caused by furlough, lockdowns, childcare at home, homeschooling has had a disproportionate impact on the finances of women. They've seen a massive pay cut, and that has had a knock-on effect on their ability to save and invest. And of course, the mental strain of juggling, staying at home, keeping a foot in the door when it comes to your career, and taking care of children. Now, the thing that really sticks out here is the disproportionate impact that this pandemic has had on the financial well-being of women.
And why has it affected women so much more than men, would you say? Because there are many men out there who would say that their mental health, also the fact that they've been out of work has affected them financially also.
Well, it is really interesting because typically during a downturn or a recession, what you see is that the impact is more pronounced on men because men dominate sectors such as construction and manufacturing, which is usually harder hit during a recession or a downturn. During this time, women tend to act as stabilizers because they might take up more employment, increase their hours if their partner or husband loses their job. But of course, with COVID-19, all those typical trends were turned on their head because of the nature of the labor market, because most women are employed in the service-based sector. So all of those things like hospitality, retail, hair salons, airlines, travel, all of the jobs that can't be done at home or from home, and all of those customer-facing careers tend to have more women employed, and that's why COVID-19 has had that really devastating impact on many women's careers. And if you look at the figures, women are 1.5 times more likely to have lost their job, quit their job, or to have been furloughed during this pandemic.
And you found that this has had an effect in terms of them sort of reducing pension contributions and making financial investments.
That's right. So we know that there's already a gender pension gap. It's almost twice the size of the gender pay gap. And it's most pronounced for women because women typically take a career break to raise children or to look after sick or elderly relatives. The knock-on impact on their pension pot is very pronounced over time. Now, with the pandemic, seeing a lot of women taking those career breaks or having a pay cut or being put on furlough, that has an impact on how much they've been able to save and, of course, how much they've been able to put into their pension pots.
So what is it that women can do to redress this imbalance? What would be your advice?
Well, I think the first thing is that we need to speak as one voice on this. We need government and industry to step up. We cannot allow uncertainty, the type of uncertainty caused by a global pandemic, to unwind years of progress that's been made on gender equality. Equally, women, while they might find themselves in a very difficult and precarious situation, need to look at investing. So while we are diligent savers, and we tend to actually save more than men, if you look at the figures, we don't tend to invest. And of course, the stock market does come with a higher degree of risk, but over the long term, investing in the stock market does result in superior returns.
Okay, good advice. If you can invest, do so. Micah Curry from Investment Director at Fidelity International, thank you. Now, while many businesses have been struggling to stay afloat during the pandemic, there are some which have been able to take advantage of lockdown. Figures from the Office for National Statistics show the number of startups increased by almost a quarter between October and December, compared with the year before. Our reporter Aisha Zahid has the story.
For this pasta delivery company, the pandemic brought on a surge in demand, and it was certainly welcome in a year which has been detrimental for many businesses. Initially facing logistical problems introduced by COVID-19, it was quick to adapt.
We chose to never stop our production. We chose to fulfill all the orders, and therefore we buckled down and we executed. Our business has grown massively. What was previously the weekly volumes now is daily volumes. So over 2020, our business grew more than fivefold.
This success story isn't one that's been widely seen. After many businesses were pushed to the brink, 2020 saw the largest GDP drop in history. But the uncertain climate hasn't stopped new startups, like this sweets company based in Hertfordshire.
I left my job in January, just before COVID, ready to get this up and started, and then COVID hit, and we just carried on throughout. We didn't let it stop us. It definitely slowed us down, but we just carried on.
It gave us the time to essentially plan everything out, so where things may have been rushed previously, having that time to really think through.
They now plan to expand their brand after striking deals with major retailers.
This business is just one of thousands to be set up in the last year. And despite the challenges of COVID-19, more than 400,000 startups launched in 2020. And with the pandemic introducing a more flexible way of working, experts say we're likely to see this trend continue.
Lockdown restrictions have played a major part in people deciding to take a chance.
I think a lot of people have had the opportunity to kind of consider entrepreneurship for the first time and really pursue it. I think a lot of businesses have been set up that are kind of passion projects. That, of course, is a challenge in making sure that that is sustainable and scalable.
While some business owners have seen positive effects from the pandemic, many now hope to see the damage to their turnover reversed. Aisha Zahid, Sky News.
As children begin to return to classrooms in England on Monday, we'll have a special programme on Sky News. We'll be hearing from students and parents about their first day back at school, and they'll be putting their questions to a panel of experts. That's COVID and the classroom back to school at 8:30 p.m. here on Monday with me. Time now for the weather with Naz. Is it warming up? It was a bit frosty this morning.
It does look like temperatures will be rising a bit next week, but next week is going to be unsettled with it as well. So actually, this weekend, if you prefer the settled conditions, is looking much better with mainly dry and bright weather.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. High pressure's keeping things fine and settled once again for today, and it's not looking too bad for most places tomorrow either. So actually a fine weekend for the vast majority of the UK and Ireland. It is a chilly start out there this morning, though. We've had clear spells and therefore frosty conditions first thing. Perhaps less cold, though, across the northwest of Scotland, where there's a little bit of light rain and cloudy skies there, but elsewhere it's a mainly dry start to the day. And it continues largely dry into this afternoon as well, with some good spells of sunshine, particularly across western and northern areas. I think over central, southern and eastern parts of England, though, there will be a fair amount of cloud. In fact, it is fairly cloudy across these areas this morning, but it still will be bright at times. But under the cloudier zones, it will be a cool day. But in the sunshine and with the light winds, it will feel mild, staying rather cloudy across northern Scotland, though, with some rain.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
This is Sky News Breakfast. Coming up, take a look at the newspapers with the entrepreneur Kate Hardcastle and the broadcaster, DJ and columnist Neve Spencer.
It's all about numbers, and boy, have we got some interesting ways of showing you what's going on.
Let's take a look at the latest figures.
Most comprehensive ever assessment. Latest analysis by Sky News suggests
that's never happened before. Totally unprecedented.
When you look at this and all the other data, you come to one conclusion.
It wasn't an easy decision to make, but I think when my husband was faced with his difficulties and we had to make a decision as to where our lives were going, it just seemed like a pretty easy decision at that time. It's something that I'd always been quite passionate about, but I think when you fall into a career that you're quite comfortable in and you're getting on okay with, you don't really think about sort of moving until such significant things happen in your life. I have so much to be thankful for. Like I said, if it wasn't for the NHS, I wouldn't be here, but the fact that my husband was also, you know, as a family, if it wasn't for the NHS, I don't think any of us would be sort of leading the lives that we are. So so it was the best way to be able to give back. And there has, I mean, historically, there's been shortages, I think, for as long as we can remember. And again, the route into getting into nursing has become a little bit more difficult, especially for those that are already established in other careers. However, now there is so many different routes in, just like myself, I actually managed to do an apprenticeship, which meant that I didn't even have the financial pressures of having to start a new career. I was actually supported all the way. So if anybody's actually considering it, I would say go for it. There are so many opportunities out there. And it's not even just nursing. There's so many different careers within the NHS. So even if you're in IT or if you're in engineering or if there's any other area that you may be interested in, like electricians, everyone's needed. So I would definitely consider it.
Did you know that reducing pollution outside of school can help stop toxic air getting trapped in our classrooms?
It'll be fairly mild in any sunny spells today, but on the whole, it'll be rather cloudy and cool again. It's going to be mainly dry, though, except across the north of Scotland, where it'll be cloudy with spells of rain and maybe some hill snow over the northwest. So taking a look at the air pollution levels on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being very high, most places will be at a low level of 1 to 3 again because of the mostly fine and settled conditions.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
With us now to take us through the newspapers again, the entrepreneur Kate Hardcastle and the broadcaster, DJ and columnist Niamh Spencer. Welcome back to you both. Starting with the Telegraph, first of all, Kate, and you've had a look at this story, really this roadmap out of lockdown and people potentially going back to the office. We wonder how difficult that might be after so long away from that daily commute.
There is such a big part to play in terms of us working in those offices, though, because obviously there's an immediate knock-on effect to all of the businesses that support the places, the coffee shops, the sandwich shops, theatres for after-work activities. So there is a huge need for us to have some life that goes back to the idea of central locations and working there. What I think the Prime Minister has said is that he rejects the complete shift to homework and he doesn't think it's going to happen. I think what we're understanding, what we're hearing from people is that actually they want balance. They're not saying they're not going to return to the office. What they're saying is now they've experienced working from home and not having to have that grind of the commute day in, day out. They've lived life differently for some time. They want to reevaluate that. They want to make change. So I think what we're probably going to see in this next normal is a period of adjustment as we use technology to try and manufacture the opportunity to work from home more. But we're also going to, I think, need to, out of a social requirement, out of a need to be with other people, return carefully into these places of work.
Niamh, to the Sun, let's talk about the royals, specifically Meghan and Harry. And the Sussexes, apparently, according to the Sun and some of the other papers, wanted to talk to Oprah Winfrey 3 years ago.
Oh, here we go. Every single paper just looking for another little piece that they can add to this dramatic puzzle. So it turns out that apparently Meghan was ready to speak up a very long time ago. Now, we know that Oprah was one of her guests at the wedding, and it feels a little bit like she was forming an alliance back then. Did she really plot this conversation 3 years ago in those early weeks when she was married to Harry? Who knows? We're going to find out more and more and more over this weekend.
It's interesting that you say Meghan rather than Meghan and Harry, and lots of the papers also say Meghan. I mean, that they are a couple. Presumably, Harry would have been in on that interview, and he's involved in the decision-making process. But that seems to be negated in all of the papers, and it's just put on Meghan's shoulders, isn't it?
I know, and it's also strange because when I was working with them, obviously at that time, they had just got married and we were referring to them as their Royal Highnesses. I mean, I curtsied when I met her, and now we're just referring to her as good old Meghan. Things have changed.
Yeah. The point, though, I was making is that it's not just about her, that they are a couple, but many of the papers do not reflect that. On to the Express, Kate, and this story about an age discrimination case.
Yes, it's a kind of point to have a conversation, and one that's really important with Monday being International Women's Day. And I think we've got this theme this year for Challenge for Change. Here is a lady that was in a role, 72, and she discovered that she was being paid less than a co-worker, and she called that out. And in the abuse that came from the conversation, she was called an old woman. Now, I'm not for 1 second suggesting that means we've all suddenly got to get on our high horse as women, but I'm not alone when I understand that there is ageism for men and women out there. I'm not prepared to have a huge percentage of what I think are going to be my golden years, if I'm lucky enough to get there, written off. I'm talking about Dolly Parton here. I'm talking about Tina Turner here. Dolly Parton, who's just invested in vaccines to try and help cure people. Yeah. You can have the golden times of your life at that age. So let's stop this ridiculous notion that at a certain point we are anything more than brilliantly experienced to be able to deal with life, because I'm calling out ageism. I've had enough of it. I want to see diversity in our workplaces because of all types of life being represented there, including people who've got more experience than me because they've lived longer.
And Eve, ageism doesn't seem to affect men in quite, thumbs up there, doesn't seem to affect men in quite the same way, does it?
Not at all, my goodness me. And the amount of times as a woman, I mean, I work as a DJ, I work in a male-dominated industry, as well as, you know, being on daytime radio, essentially as a solo female, a little bit unique. And I constantly get asked really inappropriate questions like, how old are you? That's so rude.
Do you?
Don't ask me my age. I'm not going to tell you my age, not even now.
That is very rude. Very rude. I can't imagine anyone being that brazen. But staying with highly accomplished women of senior years, you've had a look at this story in the Eye, Kate, and this is the British professor winning medal for the Oxford vaccine work that's been carried out.
So I'm going to go for my second point in this Challenge for Change International Women's Day. Can we just have a moment for Professor Sarah Gilbert? Let's hear that name. Let's understand that name. I've got 2 daughters and a son. I want them to have role models that I believe in as well as they believe in. She has just been given an award as a British vaccinologist who has been at the forefront of leading the development of the vaccine and at speed. She follows in line with people like Marie Curie, who've also won this RSA award. I mean, we have got a challenge with STEM, which is science, technology, engineering and maths. We've got a low representation, 28% of the workforce there only made up by women. We have to change this. And again, we're only going to do this collaboratively. I've worked with brilliant men and brilliant women. This isn't about a competition. This is about building bridges and not thrones. So whilst we celebrate Sarah Gilbert, let's make sure we have investment and reassurance and say her name more. So a young person, female or male, watching this can say, okay, I can do that. I'm interested in that. Our heroes can't just be people who look good on glossy magazines.
Although she does look good as well. Professor Sarah Gilbert there. Say the name, you're absolutely right. Just time to talk about this last story, Niamh, in the Eye. And we know that schools in England are returning on Monday. Hooray, 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 hooray. I, for one, am very, very, very pleased. But this story is talking about them struggling to get consent for the COVID tests.
Well, yes. I mean, there is such a huge sense of relief, just like you just said, but also as a parent, a huge sense of concern. How are our children going to stay safe? How are they going to test children? And it all seems to be a little bit muddled, much like everything has been in terms of guidance over the last 12 months. So in England, secondary school pupils will have to take 3 rapid tests within the first 2 weeks. They will then have to take further tests at home. And this whole regime is voluntary. And the main difficulty that is being found at the moment is parents' consent. They're not filling in the forms, and it's all just really all over the place. It remains to be seen how they're going to control this and mainly keep our children and our teachers safe.
Absolutely. Most important that they're kept safe. Kate and Niamh, thank you so much. See you in an hour's time.
Thank you.